discussion, of course, Nick and Wendy, so I'll let you
All right.
take it. Thank you all.
But I take a cookie with me. All right. Thanks everybody for coming out for what will be an interesting conversation. So I'll just ask both of you to briefly chat it up a little bit about who you are, whatever you'd like to say about who you are. Way of intro. We'll start with you since Wendy's got a cookie shoving around.
Nick or Nico, Brierre Aziz. I'm from New Orleans, born and raised. I'm from Haiti, so I think a lot of that comes through in my work. I've just been saying help for my MFA sculpture. I think that's
all right. That's good, Wendy.
I am a Canadian person who now works at Auburn University. I teach painting there, and my grandmother was sent to one of those notorious boarding schools where they re-educated her to be white, to be a colonizer, and so it took my family a very long time to kind of reclaim some of her ancestry because for lots of reasons. And we're celebrating her tonight through my work.
So I want to start with a couple of phrases that I saw from either your artist statements or articles about you. And one was from something that was written about Wendy, where you were called a conceptual, right? And so I love that idea for a lot of reasons. And I think that thread sort of runs through both of your bodies of work in a way. So the question that I want to pose to sort of start is, or the central question, the framing question, or whatever, is how is it that art as resistance to healing, right? How is it that helps us deal with the remnants of colonial psychosis? So one is from your artist statement, this notion of art is resistance and healing, and the other is from yours, right? I'm particularly interested in the remnants of colonial psychosis, right? Because we're living through that. Will those remnants ever die?
Was
right?
colonial psychosis in your statement, or did you just come up
No,
with
no.
that? Was that in your statement? Oh, okay. Congratulations. I really like that. Let's get it.
I think, part of it just comes from, I think, again, like I said, mom's from Haiti and my dad was in the Nation of Islam. So when I was a kid, I think got a lot of amazing Black history
And
legacy.
full-throated critique of colonialism from that side.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think a lot of it is just coming out through my work now. And I think I've said for a while how I think so many of the issues that we're seeing, you start addressing it like a mental health issue. Like so many things that because I think, for years, kind of reference how we've had millions and millions of institutes, dedicated researching why people are in poverty, all these things. And we have had not an ounce dedicated to really the psychology that put these systems in place to put the people.
The pathology of racism.
Yeah. We don't dedicate the same attention and funding, to that side of the equation. And so I think we all have, unfortunately, had to deal with the remnants of, integration and sickness. We all have elements of sickness. We're all imperial citizens. And so I think, for me, like that reference is touching on that. And I think art, the power of art is art. I think art is the most human thing we have. I think art is, I've said it in articles before that I've written, how art and artists are the front line to humanity's war against itself. And I think that comes from just this idea of we tap into self and have to tap into self to create what we create in a way that no other field of endeavor necessarily does. And I think art can touch the subconscious in ways that no other field does. So I think for me, that's the power of it. And that's the power of how we can heal ourselves through tapping into the source of ourselves.
So that introspection and generative art.
Yeah, art predates culture, quite frankly. You know, this is actually the mirror we're working on. These are pictographs from my, just on one of the Great Lakes in about 45 minutes from where I grew up. And pictographs, cave paintings, those all predate all of this, right? And so it's kind of a base human need that art is, right? Whether it predates language, it predates so much stuff. And if we want to reset, if you will, all of this stuff you're talking about, art is a great way to just press the reboot button, you know, in some ways. To go back to one of the things you first said, that the conceptual trickster, in the indigenous culture, I grew up with the stories of Nanabush, and he's an Ojibwe kind of, there's lots of gods in indigenous culture. We don't have one. And Nanabush, he was, you know, he taught lessons, and he did that he was a trickster, right? And so this idea of the trickster as a teacher is a very indigenous concept, right? And quite frankly, it's really fun if you're an artist to be a trickster. Gets me out of bed in the morning.
So this is leading me to sort of another aspect of this that I'm interested in. This kind of work that you're both doing, right? Presumably as artists, we are expressing, exploring, trying to get folks to see something in some sort of way. Yet in many ways, the art world is an echo chamber, right? So the folks we need to see that piece in there with the 21 billion, so on and so on, they are probably not going to necessarily be your audience, right? And so some of Wendy's work has been sort of in the wild, right? You've just on purpose gone and put things up for lots and lots of reasons to subvert, divert from that system. So how did you bridge that gap with audiences, right? Like you make this work and you all say this is great work, this is powerful work, but then the people who can see it may not. So, you know, talk about that tension. Maybe that's not a tension, you know.
For me, like the reason I put my work in the wild so much is because when people have their art hat on, they go to a museum. Quite frankly, I've always thought museums are where paintings went to die. You know, they're a graveyard of art, right? And I've always subscribed to that, and I've always been very critical of museums because you know they showed a very limited amount of expression throughout time, right? Often white men. Right? Until just really recently, it was really leading to one voice, right? And so I've always been hypercritical of them. And by putting your art in the wild, you don't even nobody needs to label you. You're just a person doing something, right? When I have the trailer, which is another body work, we have this 18-foot trailer we bring out and we can have exhibits from it. People don't even know we're artists. We wear lab coats and they come in and they say, what is this? That's such a powerful question. That is like the perfect space for an artist to play in. When they don't even know what you're doing, they have no preconception. And that empowers me. And I think that starts subverting everything you're talking about because you don't need the people to approve it, whoever it is.
Yeah, no, I don't think I was necessarily talking about approval, right? More about context, right? So if you want people to understand a certain thing, and that's not your audience, and you get them to at least see the work in these wild sort of ways. Does the lack of context remove their ability to get your message, right? In an audience, so we're not talking about,
right,
you know, the art documents or whatever.
Right. So if you put it under the lens of dialogical art, art of conversation, I mean, basically, if you want to have, today we live in a world where you say one thing, somebody else is going to say no, or whatever, right? Everybody's constantly in arguments. But I think an antidote to that is sitting down and just having a one-on-one conversation together with whatever person randomly walks by and says, what is this? And that nothing else matters, quite frankly. If you could change or have a connection with one person, you're successful. You know, we have to maybe redefine what success means as artists, you know, like it's okay to think small, you know? Sure. And I think that there's great power in that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think part of it that comes up for me is related to us as artists and art spaces, encouraging more people to come from a place who haven't had that connectivity, because I used to work at museums for 5 years. Through that experience, just saw how people come to art thinking that they have to get some right answer. So in every scenario, often, you know, and depending on the conceptual layers, you know, sometimes, you know, there's a lot of answers. And I think figuring out ways to show that there is no one, and like you don't have to get something right by looking at this. One of the artists, one of my professors this last year, he said how every art piece you look at is literally a mirror. Like you are having a one-on-one engagement with it, so you're bringing as much of yourself to it as is in the work. And so like sometimes the mirror can show you what you love, what you hate, what you fear, all the above. And so I think there is no right answer there. So I think like figuring out ways to encourage all people that like they can come into these spaces and engage, right? And engage and be curious, not have to like get something right or know this or that about this part of history. It's pressure.
I want to ask something that's sort of going in a little different direction, but as a follow-up, do you either of you think that it is an artist's responsibility? And then I'll insert, is it a brown, black, indigenous woman, otherwise marginalized artist's role / responsibility to be political, to say the things that the world needs to hear, right? Is that an artist's responsibility? Or not, you know, there's a whole school of thought why, but because you both make work that is personal, very personal, but also transcendent, do you consider the political or the statement, right, when you're making work, or are you just making it work? Sort of multi-layered question. But
for me, I am political, right? So it makes sense that my work would be. I think it's okay, though, that if you're an artist that's not, you know, I think authenticity is how I qualify if art is good or not. You know, I don't, half the time, the aesthetics of it may or may not move me, but doesn't mean it's good or bad art, right? So for me, I'm a teacher, so I judge art all the time. I look for that authenticity, right? And if I have a student that I'm mentoring and they're making art that doesn't fit with their personality, there's such a disconnect, right? And if they're not a political person, it doesn't make sense for them to make that kind of art. So I do think we have a responsibility to be ourselves. And as a political person, yes, absolutely. But I don't think that every young person that I mentor in my class should necessarily be political. And that's a political action unto yourself, being yourself. Absolutely. And being confident to be yourself. Absolutely. And standing up for who you are. That's unfortunately a political action. Right? So although I'm saying that, I'm also saying, yeah, no, I'm contradicting myself.
No, you're not. It's one of those things. It's one of those issues, I think, that maybe not all, but some artists really grapple with. And I'm always interested to hear how other artists do, right? I think I'm thinking about Carrie Weems, who sort of said that thing that it's your responsibility. And certainly we all make work within the context of the times in which we live in our own experiences. But I was curious, think that's something.
I don't think it's every artist's responsibility. Well, one, I guess I think similar to what you're saying, and every just being an artist, centering creativity in this type of society is a political act. Like just number one.
Right.
Being yourself, being your full self is a political act. I think centering that creativity, but then also going down the path of an endeavor that doesn't have any defined outcome or defined function within the umbrella of capitalism is a political act. Like all of our field is centered around the expression of ideas and platforms for ideas that don't have a success metric. It's not like, so I think just that itself is a political act. And then I think taking it back, like I say, artists of color.
Makes very political work, right?
Right. I see my work as, I've gotten a lot of different takes on my work, especially in school, people from a lot of different backgrounds, and threatening has been a word that's come from me, and I always find that really interesting, because I'm like, okay, what part of the mirror are you seeing that's threatening? But I think, for me, I'm just reflecting my environment and reflecting my family history. I'm trying to make sense of a lot of this, because a lot of the work is really just illuminating contradiction, like with that Bill Rosenberg, Larry Hoover piece.
Yes.
It's just like, both of these people have used the same ingredient.
But talk a little more about that specific piece, since you brought it up about who those two people are.
Yeah, so it's a piece in the back. It's made coffee and baking soda. It's a piece that takes about 14-ish hours to do. It's very labor intensive. It becomes meditative at one point, but it's just has Bill Rosenberg, Larry Hoover, and there's a plate, and there's a lighter, and there's a spoon. And Bill Rosenberg is the founder of Dunkin' Donuts. Larry Hoover is one of the most renowned drug kingpins of all time. Chicago, Gangster Disciples. They changed the name to Growth and Development in the 90s, and that's where the piece title comes from, Growth and Development. And I got it with the logo. It's a song called Coco by O.T. Genesis. And he says, I got it for the logo. So it's a drug pun. It's a joke, but it's a joke in terms of both of these figures have used the same ingredient within this product that has created wealth and addiction. In both scenarios, we look at one way and one completely other way. And again, both of them were just reflecting and responding to their immediate environments. And so I'm not saying like, I'm not making a statement. I'm just posing a question. It's like, both of these people have used the same ingredient that's in this piece, and both, they have read things that talk about how coffee and sugar tap similar parts of the brain, so as some drugs. So it's like, what causes us to look at these things these ways is just really the question.
Yeah.
And it's just in that piece. Then like with the smell of it, I think it taps into memory in a way that pieces that may not have a smell component do. So I think it's kind of.
I love that, and that juxtaposition of those two figures. I'm going to ask both of you now about some more specifics about pieces that are in the show. And Wendy, I want to ask you about the bears, right? So bears are like a powerful animal for me. And so when we had they fell over just a moment ago, I had a pause. And I said, all right, bears, what's going on? And your mother's voice is there. And they're totems on the one hand, but then they're also pikes. They're like heads on a pike, right? So can you talk a little bit more about the impetus behind the bear, right? The symbol of the bear, and the method, like why you chose to do the cast iron on the metal frill too. So okay, let me look at that.
Well, some of it's not sexy. Like we found the bear heads in TJ Maxx. We found like 30 of them in one go.
They were not cast.
They were not cast.
Wow.
Hey.
And, as artists, we're always working.
Sure.
Right? And I saw these 30 bear heads, and my husband was with me, and we're like,
I'm sure I would have bought 30 bear heads.
And at that moment, we didn't know what they would become, but we couldn't pass up that opportunity. So I just want you all to know that sometimes the piece comes to you.
That's right.
Right? And you have to be open to it. And we got them for like $3 a piece. So this is also something that artists care about. Right? So I would love to have a really lofty answer. But literally, they just entered my life one day. And then I would think we had them for about 5 minutes before I saw them speaking. And then I asked myself, well, what would they say? And I was talking to my mom on the phone literally like half an hour later, and she was telling me the story, and I was like, it came into my head that a bearer, she was talking like a bear. And then I said, oh, the bear should be giving testimony. You know, the bear should be telling the story of people that they do represent, right? Because bears are very sacred in several Native cultures and in First Nations and Indigenous cultures. And they're very dominant where I grew up. I grew up in Northern Ontario. Bears are everywhere, as are moose up on the Great Lakes. And so they meant something of the land to me, right? And they also became, like you said, totems that could speak stories. Mm-hmm. And storytelling and oral storytelling is very important also in Indigenous cultures, right? Because for all kinds of reasons, the history was passed through oral tradition. And so that's what I was doing when I was not at that conversation where it came to me, but in other conversations with my mom, because my grandma died when I was like 12, and she never spoke about her history to me because I was 12, right? And how do you tell a 12-year-old, the horrors of your childhood? It's appropriate, but it's not appropriate. And she, quite frankly, I think was shamed. And she didn't want to talk about those things because she felt so much shame. And I understand all of it now, but at the time, at 12, I didn't understand. I just thought she was kind of like mean, but she wasn't raised the way other grandmothers that my friends had were raised, right? I was like, why is my grandma not all warm and fuzzy? And there was such a disconnect when I was a kid. And now I have such forgiveness for her and my mom, but yeah, I wanted those stories to be told. And so then they became about me, because my mom was kind of like shy and she'd go off on tangents. So I said, oh, I have to interview her, right? And then I interviewed my sister, and then I interviewed her children. And so there's 3 generations of me interviewing my family to bring that tradition back and also to document it. Right? Because my mom's 80 something now, and she could die any moment, right? And then that story and that connection would go away if I don't document it. And now we have the technology to document it, right? And in a way that generations before it would have gotten lost because they weren't record keepers in the way that we keep records now. So that's kind of the impetus of how that came. And quite frankly, in my head, I want thousands and thousands of bears, and I want them all to tell lots of stories. Yeah. Right? So this piece is young. I like pieces that don't end. I like pieces that grow with you. And so my idea is to just keep interviewing people. But I started with my family because they're the closest to me, and they were also very willing.
This story that you're telling dovetails with another kind of concept that I think came out of Nick's writing or some artist statement, but this idea of the work that you make, that we make, is a way to help you navigate, understand, construct the future, right? And I'd love to hear what both of you or either of you have to say about that. How does your work, how does art in general help us do that? Right? Help us move ourselves forward, right?
I think the first thought that comes to me is the work, what it's doing in the present moment. Because it's creating conversation, it's creating new conversation, it's creating, in some cases, new pathways for exploration. It's healing, it's making people laugh, it's making people cry sometimes, making people feel things that then shift how they operate in that moment, which naturally changes the very next moment. So I think again, that goes back to that power of art to really tap in to a part of ourselves that I think is so such the essence of our human experience. Yeah.
Wendy?
Well, I think we're in a moment where if we could remember a little bit more history, a little better, we would probably be way better off, you know? And so I think we're living in a moment where we're realizing how important history is, you know?
Are we really?
Yeah. And it's really, it's unfortunate that's the example. Because it means we all have to live in this moment, and that is a hard moment to live through. For me, in thinking of the future, you know, so much of how my impact on the future is every day in my classroom as a teacher, and it's really hard to disconnect what I do 9 to 5 with my art. You know, I mix it all up because I feel like I'm also a teacher sometimes in my art and vice versa, and I bring what I've learned back into my classroom, and it's all mixed up. I don't have tidy boxes, and I've always had a very expansive notion of what everything should be. And in part, it's probably because I am so mixed up in culture. You know, I don't fit tidily in a box. In my ancestry, I don't fit tidily in a box. Like, I taught painting for 20 years, and I hardly ever made a painting. You know, and that was a challenge in academia. And I quite frankly think we're richer when we're expansive and not reductive. And we're richer historically when we have all the stories on the table, because we can learn from those stories. And I think that this kind of work, what it does is it creates spaces that people can tell their story, right? Because you're opening a door for storytelling, and you're opening a door for history keeping. And that is really, really important, because there's so many times where I've been to an event for one thing, and then I hear 8 other stories they're connected but not, you know, and I realize how few spaces there are for us to orally keep that history with each other. And so I think that if we do that more, we'll be stronger in the future. You know, I also think that selfishly, that I'm stronger when I make this work. Right, because meditations come up a lot, because my paintings are insanely meditative. Like, I just create work for myself so I can zone out, and that's very healing. And there's definitely a indigenous idea of healing by making things, and that's where kind of beadwork and quill work before that, and birch bark art before even that, the idea of keeping yourself busy so your mind can go to this other place. It's very spiritual. And for me, if I didn't make those paintings, I think I'd be too angry to get up.
I was going to ask you about some of the symbolism or mark making, because I make a lot of mark in your paintings. The first thing that I thought about when I saw them up close is, I mean, I thought about DMT elements, actually, machine elements and things like that, but this kind of membrane, sort of filtery membrane kind of experience. And I don't know if that's what's there, but can you talk a little bit more about specifically your paintings? You said that they were Zen and meditative and all of that, but talk a little bit more about the structure of them, or however you'd like to approach it.
So in talking about the membrane, there's quite physically a membrane. It's this stuff. And I was working with some people in Philadelphia at the Murals Arts Association. I don't know if you all know them. The Philadelphia has an amazing mural history and culture there. And they developed this technology, and I was interested in it because I wanted to bring it into my classroom, because I wanted my students to make bigger murals, and I was told I couldn't bring them on site. So how do you do that, you know? And this technology allows you to cut up a really big mural into pieces. It's Tyvek, and you can print on it. And I thought, well, hey, that's plastic, and I can seal it with plastic, and I can digitally print on it. I can make these crazy digital kind of things. And painters love innovation. You know, we all think of them as like not having a lot of innovation, and there isn't. It's slow moving innovation. It's like the tube came along, and that was mind blowing. Painters, like, they could put paint in a tube. So painting innovation is slow, but when it comes, they're all over it. And so this was a new kind of innovation, to be able to print digital files really large. And I just really wanted to play with that, because innovation is fun for artists too, right? Like, again, not everything we we have lofty goals, but sometimes we just want to play, and I was playing.
Sure.
Playing with the digital files, which I'd already made a bunch of paintings that were based on digital sketches that I had warped and stuff, and I could make them more, even kind of more itty bitty and more like intense for me to then paint, right? And so the membrane is this new technology that allows digital printing, and it is plastic with oil paint on top. And so I thought, well, this would be really archival because it's plastic, right? It lasts forever. And the environmentalist in me was like, hey, this will be around for way more than 200 years. And I wanted to make that kind of record keeping too, where it could last forever. And so I thought printing on plastic and painting on plastic.
So it was driven more by materials
And play and
and
innovation.
process and
And
play,
innovation,
experimentation and all of that.
And creating an environment where I could really geek out, you know, because we're nerds. You know, there's a certain nerdiness in wanting to sit in front of something for 20 hours every day. And I knew if I could make design, to belittle them, that were really hard, I could really zone out and geek out and play.
Okay.
So it's also a challenge to myself to sit there for extended periods of time and work on like this much space.
Thank you. I wasn't thinking at all about that part of it, right? I was just thinking about the visual experience that I was having of it. So that's interesting to hear. The next question that I have to ask is about the donuts on the ring, right? You were talking about the fact that some of those donuts are from like August or something, right? And I think that's the scariest thing in the whole. What? So, talk a little bit more about that. Well, when I first saw the Time to Make a Donuts thing, immediately that damn commercial has been playing in my head, right? So thank you for
I
that.
never saw
Yeah,
it.
so
Yeah, my dad.
I'm with you. I'm with
Yeah,
you.
okay,
Yeah.
so thank you for that. I've been thinking about trying to make the donuts for the last like week or so. But when I saw that, and then I thought about what you were saying, not just your family history with baking, but this busyness, right? And productivity and all that. So I have like zero work ethic, really, in the way that we think of work ethic, and I think that's a good thing. But I'm interested in how you have chosen the donut to represent that, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think the idea of rethinking, redefining productivity, feel like maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Like the hustle culture and all that.
Yeah,
Stuff.
like
Right.
no grind, no sleep, like that whole.
Right.
I never subscribed to that.
Right.
No sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, we should all those. So I think, yeah, I never subscribed to that. I think my dad was the entrepreneur. He's an entrepreneur. Has been my whole life, and like he used to make me spell entrepreneurship when I was a kid. I guess like just that was like an exercise, you know. So I think the idea of business and efficiency and productivity and capitalism is in my subconscious in a way that I probably even know. You know, I went to business school before art school, like right after Morehouse. I was a business major at Morehouse, so I think a lot of that.
When did you graduate from Morehouse?
When?
When?
2012.
2012. My dad, 1960.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so you know what's up.
Yeah. Clark career.
Oh, okay, cool. Tasty. Yeah, no, so yeah, I mean, I think that was just like in me, like thinking about that, but then I really started, you know, immersing myself in art like 2015, and I started really making art 2017, and I feel like through that, like there's a sound piece I have in the show, and actually I have clips from the commercial in the sound piece, and then there's a like an AI kind of generated voice that says part of art's function is to go against Western distorted views of time, and I think, you know, whether we're thinking about indigenous or African ways of looking at time, it's not this like linear idea that is so embedded with the Western consciousness. Like, the idea of wasting time is not, like that's such a farce. Like, it's, you can't, it's like,
That's right.
yeah. So I think like for me, I have felt that, and I think the show has been a way to like kind of like dig into that. And so the donut really just came about through the first piece I actually did related to the donuts was that coffee piece in the back. That was my second semester at Yale, and the response was just so crazy and so amazing and generative, and that just kind of pushed me to the point of, okay, well, how can I go further with this and that? And I literally just started. There's like the Yale Sculpture Studios are here, and like on the same exact block as Dunkin' Donuts, and so I just was like, okay, and so like I went there. But then I think the first time I was in a class called Material Dematerial, and I bought a box of donuts, and I just let them stay in my studio for like weeks, and I was just like, and I just noticed, I was like, these aren't changing anything, like this, this is like, it just became like science in a way. Yeah, right. And so like for my I did a piece that was like for my first semester, second year. And it looked like a cross, but it was a dekenga, which is a African cosmologist. And it was donuts were like in the ring. And from there, like, and those donuts had been maybe like at that point 4 or 5 months old.
What's the longest time you've had unchanged donuts?
That would be June of 24 to April of 25.
And it finally got hold.
No.
Still.
So this piece that's in here, I mean, shout out to Curtis for collecting these donuts. These donuts I started collecting in like August. But like the ones I had in my thesis show, I had the same piece in my thesis show. And those are donuts that I collected from June of 24 to like March of the following year. And like no change.
No.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, they were hard to choose.
Yeah, it's very, very hard. But like, yeah, and the smell state is way longer. I really don't get that either. What I did, so I did like go through their like ingredients, and I did find some of the preservatives they put in, like potassium sorbate and sodium propionate, I think it's called. But yeah, like, so in my thesis show, I had those powders like in the pile of like white baking soda, and so yeah, it was, and I had the materials list, So I think, yeah, it's clearly, it's a commentary on waste, it's a commentary on gluttony, it's a commentary on just capitalism, the extraction and it's a lot, obviously. But what I really, with the thesis work, was trying to do was make something that was visually beautiful but gross at the same time. Like, because when you look at it, it's stunning in an element to it where it's like, whoa, like, but then it's like, wait, this is gross. Like,
Because when I looked at them up close, I thought, I work in ceramics, but I hate ceramics. So, because it's just too much of a process, right? But, so when I got to them, I was like, oh, these have to be ceramic. And I was like, maybe they're still black. But then I was like, oh, they're raw.
Yeah.
And that was really terrifying. Right? It was really terrifying. So, which I think is accurate, right?
Yeah.
Because capitalism is the sort of, for me, there's a lot of terrorist notion, right? Or it has been real in that way. So I think that's really important.
Yeah.
But what's our time? Yeah. Okay. All right, let me.
I like that capitalism is a year-old donut.
I think like when I went to it also became like this representation for like New Age colonialism too, because like I went to I got a travel grant through Yale to go to Paris last summer, and in the subways in Paris there's like these huge Krispy Kreme ads with donuts that say le meilleur de croissant de Paris, which is like the best croissant in Paris. is a Krispy Kreme donut.
Yeah,
You know,
no,
it's just
sure,
like,
yeah, no,
that's
no.
crazy. You
Yeah,
know?
but and I'm someone that's like from the South, where Krispy Kreme is, it's just like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
It's a
yeah.
lot.
Yeah. And so, I mean, like, yeah, the donut just became a symbol to really go into the history of coffee and sugar as colonial material, like even going back, like part of, I think, one of my statements was talking about how before the Europeans were trading bodies using humans, they were trading molasses, coffee, sugar, and like the psychology was like, oh, we're going to try this with humans too. You know, like that's a sickness, you know, that has now, you know, plagued us all, you know, and so I think like the donut as you know, innocent and mundane as it may seem, actually has some layers to it. And it's in the contemporary sense, just kind of, I think, with art, just breaking down those barriers between past, present, and future. Because, you know, this thing that's in our present actually has a direct, you know, link to, you know, some of the ridiculousness of how we got here from the past.
Right, and in that, in keeping with that vein, productivity and, you know, a work ethic is just an imperialist tool, right? Right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so in that way, thinking about getting up at 5 a.m. to make these toxic, terrible, undying donuts becomes just, you know, more addictive than they are. It's just
Yeah.
like, it's just,
In that commercial, I mean, I think when my dad told me about it and then looked it up and watched it, I was like, wow, like this figure like groggily waking up. It's like, it's time to make the donut.
and they play it all the time.
Okay, I'm like, I wasn't in the world yet.
Okay. You know, and
Maybe I was hearing it, you know.
You could have been hearing.
but, yeah. So I'm just consulting all of my notes because we've talked about a lot of these things that that I wanted to ask about, but I want to stick with another bit of Nick's work, and maybe y'all sort of answered some of this in other questions, but so you've got the work that Finger Looking Good and When the Slaves Went Marching, right? And so these are concepts, the concepts that are brought up in both those works are things that a lot of people might be aware, right? People who are aware and thinking and sort of conscious about these kinds of things. And on the one hand, it angers me as an artist, right? That we still have to make this kind of work, right? But on the other hand, how does that kind of work move society, or can it? So that's the part where I say you may have answered that before, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, again, I think it starts with self because at least with When the Slaves Go Marching In, that whole series is called Rafters, and it's using, it's really just interrogating the fleur-de-lis symbol. So this is a symbol of New Orleans, and it's a symbol that's, you know, on our football team, and it's a symbol that was branded on runaway enslaved Africans. And so I think there's just this like ridiculous irony that there is an entire black football team with this symbol on there, in the same place their bodies that their ancestors would have been, you know, and then that's a product of not talking about the history, you know, enough. And so,
and what football really is.
right, you know, and so I think,
sports.
right, and how the black body is used, whether it is in sport or whether it is in something like slavery, you know, and so I think that work is really just, it starts with self because I was and still am a sense. You know, I think, you know, I grew up, you know, going to, I was a fan of things when people used to wear bags on their heads, you know, for the games. You know, it was we were like horrible. I mean, we aren't that great now either, but yeah, we were horrible. And so I think like growing up and like learning, you know, more about the world and the symbol and everything, the work is just a reflection of that. And in a way to, like there's this artist who I very look up to, David Hammons, and he has this quote, he says, the greatest tailor makes the fewest cuts.
That's right.
And so with that piece, there is like, there's very few cuts. The real only cut really is the switching of the name on the jersey and the number. You know, the number I put as the court case number for the enslaved Africans who were in the 1811 slavery rebellion, which was the largest one in North American history in New Orleans. And the names are those who were in the rebellion. You know, and so I'm really just working with a language and a visual language of like this kind of honoring NFL Hall of Fame case type thing, but just like switching, a little, just making a little modification that maybe like points for different discussion.
So thank you. And so the connection I'm going to make to Wendy's work is maybe a little subtle, because what I want to know is, because of your grandmother's right history in those ridiculous schools, right? And I recall that you said that she was not very forthcoming in talking about it. Right? How were you able to extrapolate those stories of imperialism, right? And move that into your art, other than the TJ Maxx barricades, right? The tails, right? How have you been able to pull that particular variant of imperialism?
So I wanted to talk about my ancestry forever. And I think as a younger artist, I wanted to do it so much justice, and I put so much pressure on myself to do it justice, that I never came to a place where I was comfortable grappling with it openly. I did do it in all my work, because I made environmental work. I made work about the land, right, and how to protect it. So I did dialogical work, which I connect back, so there's a lot. I did it, but I did it subversively. I wasn't open about it, in part because there's this concept called pretensionism. And there's a lot of infighting within the nations about who should be what. And I didn't want to be labeled a pretendian, and I wanted to officially go through the system, even though it's a little bit messed up that you have to go through a system, to claim your validate. But I also didn't want to dishonor it, right? So I came to a place now, I'm in my mid-50s, and I started this work in my early 50s, where I finally was like, well, it's now or never, and my mom's gonna die, and I want her to see it. And my whole family had put pressure on my mom in various ways throughout coming up, to be more open about it. Like my sister named her children Raven, and like we within the family we were open, but my mom was always like, oh no, we're not, because when I was born, they were still taking kids. Right. So I get why my mom didn't want to be super open about it. Right. Because if I was born in the 70s, and children were still being taken to these schools. So you want to give your children the best. So you don't, if the best is passing as something else, again, I forgive her for doing that. Right. Like I forgive her for doing that. But now that everybody's older, and she, it all just kind of clicked, where she was ready. And we could enroll, and everything kind of clicked together. And I was in a place where I was mature enough to say, although I'm putting all this pressure on myself, I just need to do it, and I need to be open about it. And so I think, it just time.
Have you done work about that aspect of it, that passive aspect? Because, that's deep.
Yeah, so I think it's there. I think it's there, and it's there definitely when I talk about it, because I can talk about how it was a challenge to, the first ideas for all of this work was reclamation, right? Re-owning this thing that was taken from us, re-owning these things that I should have naturally gotten from my grandma, who was shamed into not giving them to me, which then shamed my mother. Mm-hmm. And like my grandmother went to those terrible schools that, probably, they found so many dead children on these campuses, right? So you can't even imagine what the children there went through. And then my grandmother, she went through that system, and then she became a nurse, and then nobody would hire her because she was indigenous, right? She was too dark. And so what was the point of that system if you then wouldn't hire the people you trained? You know what I mean? And so it's so confusing for her and then my mom, because my mom saw that and she saw what was taken from her and she saw what my grandma did and she went to nursing school and she was a janitor. She was and Canada has a healthcare crisis. You know, they need people. They've always needed people. And so that confusion, I think, plays in the imagery of the work, because I don't want you to look at it and get it immediately, right? I want you to have to spend time like we had to spend time. And so it's intentionally complex so that you, as our history was, and as my experience was. So it's a really direct one-to-one from my experience to the imagery. Didn't want it to be easy imagery, although I am using easy imagery. These are the two images I'm using are the group of 7, which is, you know, they're landscape painters. And if you grew up in Canada, which you all didn't, but you recognize it from a billion miles away. It's on every coffee mug and it's on every umbrella. It's the Monet of Canada, basically, and the Impressionism of Canada. And then the Woodland School, which is the very first time that Indigenous people said, we need to record this publicly, because it was sacred imagery. And so the Woodland School actually got in a lot of crap from the other Indigenous people for documenting it and putting it into the world. But if they hadn't done that, it would have been lost. Right. And so that's also the very first time that Indigenous people owned their imagery publicly. Right. So there's a lot of sacred hiding, you know, within the tradition. And I think my family was kind of doing that too, maybe not necessarily under such a sacred lens, but this hiding is
Navigating imperialism.
Yeah. And so, you know, I'm hoping that the imagery is complex enough to touch on that, you know, which is maybe the answer you were alluding to the other time you asked me the question. Right. And that's very intentional. So the animals are there, but they're not there. And the landscape is there and they're not there. And they're intentionally painted at different moments. So sometimes they're completely blown out and you can hardly find something. And then and they look very abstracted. And at other times it's easier. And I wanted all of those states of the experience to be there. And so within the paintings, the viewer's experience should be, oh, I see it, or oh, I don't know what's going on in that one, you know, and I think that intentionally tries to replicate my family's experience and my experience. And I think our experience with Indigenous culture, right? Because there's moments where we try to completely suppress it for colonial reasons. And then there's moments where, you know, we want our children to play cowboys and Indians in the 50s, and the imagery is usurped as this nostalgic notion to sell something, you know, like on baking powder and cigar boxes. What's that about? You know, there's the tobacco, butter. You know, butter, you know, we have all these times where the imagery is stolen for capitalism to sell something, right? And that's very easy imagery. So I didn't want my paintings to go that route, you know. And there's also, if you're making Indigenous art, people expect it to look a certain way.
Oh, absolutely.
And I didn't want it to go that route. Like, there's so many Indigenous artists where the beadwork is so obvious. Right, and then you're like, oh, you must do beadwork, and so yeah, I get it, but I don't get it, you know. So there is beadwork references in it, but it's not leading with it. It's not like I think the most famous Métis artist right now is exclusively doing paintings that look like beadwork. Her name is Michelle Bonnecourt. Anyways, and it's so expected. And it's so much more complex than that. And I felt if I did expected Indigenous work at any point in my career, including the other work that I did where I was very subversive, I think that it minimized it, you know, and it minimized the experience. And I didn't want to give people the work they thought an Indigenous person should make, although I am using it in the work, but I wanted to hide it and I wanted to mess it up and make it more complex.
And, you know, as brown artists, brown, Indigenous, Black artists, and again, it's maybe just me, but it's sort of infuriating that we have to go through those levels of
thought or minimize, like, oh,
Right.
you're this, you have to make
Yeah,
that.
am I gonna make this? Wait, oh, no, I don't wanna do that, so I'm gonna go in this direction and do this, but, to sort of situate ourselves in these ways based on how we want to be perceived, accepted, navigated in, again, the layers of the article, right? So that's really
And I think our
interesting.
emotions as humans, it's very complex because you're proud of who you are,
That's right,
but you're also,
more than that.
and but you're also squished
Right.
into like these expected notions of who you should be.
Mhm.
So you're proud, so you want to be proud, but you also don't want to be expected
Right,
because you're more complex than that.
right.
Right. And so I think that our job as people who are sometimes othered is to know that that's there, how we should be making art in the colonial lens of whatever it is they think we should be doing, with who we actually are as people and our pride, because I do love beadwork and I love wearing moccasins.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to only be that.
That's right. I think that's the best way to say it. It's you, I am a Black woman living in America and I can only be that. But you have defined me as a Black woman when I really just sort of want to be Jennifer, who is also these other things, right? So.
And if I want to talk about that, I can. But if I don't want to, I can be all these other things.
Exactly.
Right. And they want us to be, again, I like to say like minimize. That's my new favorite word.
I'm thinking about Zora Neale Hurston, and I can reference for almost anything. There's a passage in Your Eyes Were Watching about best books ever, but she's talking about her grandmother who enslaved the raised her. She says, some people take the ocean and want to make it into a public, right?
She's got so many good quotes.
Oh. Nick, I'll ask you if you have a final thought. Thank you, Wendy. That was amazing in terms of talking about the complexity in your paintings. Do you have a final thought?
I'd say just the importance of, again, like centering creativity in your life, whether it's art or chef or whatever, like, I think that's right. I think like that's the, I think that, having there's this artist, John Scott, who passed away, I think 2011, but he's from New Orleans. He's like one of our, if not the most renowned artists from New Orleans, abstract sculptor. And he has this quote where he says, I cannot call myself an artist, that's the community's job. And so I've just always resonated with that so deeply.
Yeah.
Because I think, we all have something to contribute. And I think we all have creative energy, whether it's chefing, baking, gardening, visual art, film, whatever, it's like, so I think just the final thought is like the importance of centering that, within yourself, whatever that may be.
We're all humans and we all enjoy that stuff.
Yeah.
Everybody, no matter who you are.
Creativity is essential to humanity.
That's why cave paintings came first.
Well, thank you both.
Thank you.
Really lovely conversation.
Thank
Thank you.
Any questions? Just 5 minutes. Anybody, any questions?
You look at y'all, I guess, pieces of the artwork, you all think it's more like through a circling. We look at it, it's like, okay, I've been through certain different adversities. When you make the art, does it feel like, okay, this is what I've been trying to show people this whole time? Like, more full circle kind of thing.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a full circle element. So I didn't start, really engaged in art till like 2015. I mean, I was already doing different things. Like in college, I was editor-in-chief of my newspaper. I was making magazines. I was making films with my friends, but I didn't consider that really like anything novel. It took me getting into the professional world, and I worked this job. And first supervisor told me once, and ironically, I worked for a team called an innovation team. And she told me I was being too creative. And I was just like, what? I was like, that's. I didn't even know what, but I didn't, I was like 22 or 23 years old. So I was so young. I was like, what do you mean? What is, I didn't even realize what creativity was in that sense, And so for me, but I was always so drawn to, art and expression, and I grew up around art, in my family, and I was always sharing art, and so then when I started making it myself, and then like just kind of seeing how things progress, like to have an opportunity like this is extremely full circle because it's like, okay, it's the signs from above showing me, okay, I'm continuing on the correct path, that's been, outlined for me. So yeah, it's very full circle. Right.
Are you asking about this idea that the things that you think about and go through when they end up in a finished piece? Is that like,
Yeah, like-
kind of,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I think where the works come from, I think the best thing as a creative or an artist, whatever, as a creative centered person, is just consuming. Like what's your creative diet, and what's your metabolism like, so I read a lot. Like I'm a super art nerd. Like I have books in my bed. I read every night. Like I just really consume a lot of that stuff. And I think for me it's like that is part of my diet. And then so I fuse that, that which I read or I go to a lot of art shows. I just went to one right before this opening at the ABA, the Young Get to the Black show. Like I went there right before this, and so I think through all of that consumption, I then like see where my lens and voice comes in, and that's what you see here, and that is the circle because it's just me like taking in, and then provide something back out, and then getting to see people's feelings and reactions to it is amazing. To see how something that comes from your mind can impact you. People buy my work. I always say like it's such a gift. Like, oh, you want to live with a thought that I had? Like that's amazing. And so I will always be so grateful for that.
Anybody else? Comments?
This is one of the most interesting talks I've ever been to.
Thank you.
See, we need all the voices.
Yeah. And I come from a Nigerian word, like this just been like mind blown. So I hope you guys write books. No, I always feel like this kind of thing, like there's so few people in this room that got like only we got to witness this conversation, and I just want like other people to hear.
We have it on video, so
That's great.
share it with the world.
thanks. She wanted to record, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, and you can follow everybody on Instagram. I guess everybody has a handle. There are QR codes on the card, so if you just scan it, there's more information about the work. And I think both of the works are really, much deeper. I think than what we can cover here in the short period of time. I think in these current times that the work that all three artists are doing is just really important. Thank you all for coming out and sharing this, and thanks for the artists for sharing your work with us. And Jennifer, thank you for all of the work that you're doing, and thank you all for being in the community.
And thank you for providing the space.
Well, it takes a village for us. Thank you, but again, y'all just especially in these times, go out there and share all this important work that artists are doing, and hopefully things are changing soon. So anyway, thank y'all. Yeah,